This presentation will provide an overview of a proposed project involving 2 clinical trials to be carried out in Qatar involving stem cell therapy. We will discuss the overall goal of this project. We will describe the approach that we use to implement these clinical trials. We will discuss the scientific and regulatory guidelines that will be followed in executing these clinical trials. We will outline a proposed plan of action that will govern and implement these 2 clinical trials. We will also describe why Weill Cornell Medical Qatar will be an excellent potential partner for these studies. And finally, we will provide a summary of the expertise of our team that makes them a good candidate to carry out these trials. The overall goal of this project will be to establish Qatar as a world-famous medical tourist destination for the treatment of patients with degenerative disc disease of the spine and osteoarthritis of the knee using stem cell therapy developed by the Zemina Corporation and QARTA-STEM. This slide presents a brief history of the development of QARTA-STEM. The scientific background of QARTA-STEM was carried out by Dr. Ha at the Samsung Medical Center, with co-development by Medipost. Medipost manufactures QARTA-STEM currently and has the worldwide marketing rights for this agent. Zemina has the rights to distribute QARTA-STEM and carry out clinical trials in Qatar. The clinical trials described here will be carried out in collaboration with Zemina and appropriate entities in Qatar that will be described later. We are currently exploring establishing a consulting relationship with Samsung Medical Center. All of the studies and the material prepared here were done in collaboration with Zemina. The approach that we propose to follow is to design and implement investigator-initiated clinical trials in the most scientifically rigorous manner possible and with strict adherence to regulatory compliance. This will ensure that there will be a high probability that the results can be published in a high-impact academic journal and provide the evidence supporting the efficacy of QARTA-STEM therapy in degenerative disc disease and osteoarthritis of the knee to be carried out in Qatar. Not only will this publication provide the scientific evidence through publications, but it will also provide the technical marketing and other medical marketing opportunities to illustrate that Qatar is an ideal place to carry out this therapy. Which shows the website of Zemina, including studies carried out with QARTA-STEM, shows why Zemina and QARTA-STEM will provide excellent collaborations to carry out the studies in Qatar. This slide illustrates that the Food and Drug Administration in the United States has drafted guidance for investigator-initiated trials. These guidances are both scientific and regulatory in nature and will be discussed on the next slide. On the previous slide, we referred to the guidance documents published by the FDA. This slide, borrowed from the Novartis website, illustrates that a large number of pharmaceuticals have adopted these guidance documents and use them to help investigators plan and execute their clinical trials. On the next slide, we'll discuss them in more detail. On this slide, we provide a simple overview of what the guidance documents published by Novartis actually contain. They state that clinical trials, in specific investigator-initiated trials, must set out to address meaningful scientific and/or clinical objectives, supported by value study designs. This is an important point, in which the privacy rights, safety, and welfare of patients is paramount importance. The last clauses indicate the importance of regulatory compliance in carrying out these investigator-initiated trials. This slide reviews the proposed plan of action. The first step will be to designate a blue ribbon steering committee to oversee the initial planning and implementation of these studies. The goals of the steering committee will be to assemble a team of interdisciplinary, international, and local experts, including a principal investigator in Qatar, all of whom have established experience and recognized academic credentials. This team will define the protocol for the study within 60 days, establish a screening process for patients along with criteria for establishing a control group and study group for the studies, creating the infrastructure for the implementation of the studies in collaboration with an academically experienced clinical trial group in Qatar, possibly the Weill Cornell Medical Qatar, establish the necessary processes emphasizing both the clinical and regulatory guidelines outlined previously for the study. This will address the requirements necessary for publication of the results in internationally recognized high-impact journals. This group will also monitor the study's progress. This slide illustrates the core facilities necessary for clinical research that are available through the Weill Cornell Medicine Qatar. These fit with the needs of the project as illustrated previously. It would be useful to enlist the Weill Cornell Medicine Qatar facility as a collaborative entity through these studies. The qualifications of the planning team. As mentioned previously, Zemina Corporation has the distribution rights of Cardistem in Qatar, as well as retaining the rights to manage clinical trials of this agent in Qatar. The personnel from Zemina and Dr. Robert Linkinski's, whose qualifications will be described shortly, were instrumental in putting this presentation together and carrying out some of the early planning of the approach to be followed in this project. Dr. Robert Linkinski is an experienced investigator with more than 35 years of experience in the technical development of medical imaging devices and running clinical trials to evaluate their efficacy. He was a full professor at 2 Ivy League schools, starting with the University of Pennsylvania, where he was a full professor in the Department of Radiology, and moving on to Harvard Medical School, where he was a full professor and a vice chair for research in the Department of Radiology of the Beth Israel Medical Center. Dr. Linkinski has published extensively in the area of clinical trials. In his last academic position, from which he recently retired, he was the vice chairman for research in the Department of Radiology at the University of Texas at Southwestern Medical Center, which is the flagship medical school for the University of Texas system. In his role, he developed an extensive clinical trials program which managed both the regulatory issues associated with carrying out clinical trials as well as the logistical issues of carrying these out in a rigorous fashion. He brings this experience to this project. He has published extensively in a variety of high-impact journals. He has more than 250 peer-reviewed publications and has developed strong relationships with a variety of vendors in this field. He will be involved in setting up the initial blue ribbon panel, monitoring the progress of the trials, and ensuring that both the regulatory and compliance guidelines, as well as rigorous scientific efforts are pursued throughout the course of these 2 investigator-initiated clinical trials.